Good evening and welcome to this free BFI online discussion, which is about a revolutionary piece of TV drama that you can see later tonight if you're at home, which you probably will be. The anti-COVID-19 lockdown measures announced by the government on March the 23rd led to all British TV drama production, classified as non-essential work, being closed down. But each night at 9 p.m. this week, ITV is screening the first new British television fictions to have been made since the anti-pandemic measures were introduced.
Melanie! I want to see the bump. Let's see the bump.
So how many of you are there?
Me and Alison, Shelley, Mark and Daniel.
You've got 11 people and you didn't even ask me.
Somehow you'd be a lovely mum.
I'm sure he's got it.
It was never going to be easy, Russell.
You think your own dad would at least try and forgive you, wouldn't you?
Come on, I've got to take your temperature.
That's a turkey probe.
You can put it up the other end if you like.
You can't lose mum and dad in the space of a couple of years.
Are you serious?
No, last time we spoke, you seemed to be all right.
Yes, and then the plague made an unexpected and unwelcome return. Christ,
Okay, but what is it exactly?
What is it exactly? Exactly, yeah. I think I'm going to get it and I'm going to die, obviously.
I'm not flouting, observing distancing.
Do you mind telling that idiot father of yours to stop coming round?
He's doing it because he wants to see the boys. So do I. Stephen, please.
New short dramas, isolation stories, Monday to Thursday at 9 on ITV.
So we saw clips there from the 4 isolation stories showing on ITV this week, the second shows tonight after this discussion. We stress that ITV has not broken any laws. The 4 episodes of isolation stories were produced entirely within social distancing measures. In these behind-the-scenes clips from the 4th drama, Karen, we get a sense of how the dramas were made using only people already inside the house and with sterilised equipment delivered to it. So we got a sense there of how the process worked. You saw the actor Robert Glenister picking up the equipment. You saw a glimpse of what the technicians saw in the drama in Philomena Eddie Marsan's house. And then you saw Robert Glenister's wife, Celia de Wolf, a distinguished radio producer in real life, making her debut as a television director and director of photography. So we're going to explain how all this worked, this revolutionary new form of TV drama. Joining me for tonight's discussion, you can see, for people of my generation, this is like a program called Celebrity Squares, where very famous people used to be introduced and then wave from their boxes. So if they, yes, they are exactly like that. You see, there are people who have also seen Celebrity Squares in the boxes, and they will identify themselves in some way. Jeff Pope, ITV's head of drama, who is the executive producer of these series. Gabby Chappie, who's written one of the 4 stories, Mel, starring Sheridan Smith, and 2 of the actors we've seen a glimpse of them already. Eddie Marsan, who appears in the play Karen as a man who'd like to be even more distanced from his father-in-law, and Angela Griffin, who plays a shrink giving an online consultation to a tricky client in Mike and Rochelle. And our Zoom panel is completed by Paul Whittington, who directed the Sheridan Smith episode Mel, which was written by Gabby, and by Tom Dunbar, who produced the whole series. So we'll start with you, Jeff. I said that no current laws have been broken, but almost every rule of TV drama production has been broken. Most famously, and it must be astonishing to writers and actors here, the year at least it normally takes to get from idea to screen.
Yes, that's exactly, from first idea to being on air last night was less than a month, just about a month. And so normally that process would be anything from 18 months, 2 years, or even more. But the thing driving us was a couple of things. I felt as if in the picture, the whole picture of how we reflect what's going on, the voices of writers and actors and directors, I felt was missing. And it is that lead time that normally would preclude us from being part of this. But we 2 things, by deciding on a short film format, obviously that meant that it was going to be a shorter production time. And but by driving ourselves to be on air whilst the pandemic was still current. I mean, we didn't want well, we do want lockdown to end, but we wanted to transmit whilst we wanted to make it, to write it, make it, and broadcast all during the current crisis. And so that was what was really driving us forward.
So, conspiracy theorists out there, Jeff, you're responsible for them suddenly extending lockdown, are you? So that they you could go out while it was still on.
We did have a word and say, look, if you could just wait until what would it be, May the 7th? May the 8th would be a nice no. What was really liberating was some of the talent that I was able to invite to take part in this. Everybody was available. That was the joy of this. But that was only a tiny part of the conundrum, because it was one thing someone being available, but then it was like then we needed. I mean, Eddie's family is a perfect.
Well, I was going to say, we'll bring in Eddie, because Eddie's a good example. I mean, you're used to being cast in stuff, Eddie, but this was an unusual casting request because you had to bring 3 people with you.
Yeah, I suspect I wouldn't have got the job if I didn't have so many kids. Yeah, I was just phoned up and said and told my agent said, we've got a job for you. It's on location. And I said, well, I can't go anywhere. She said, no, the location's your house, and your wife's the cameraman, and your kids are in it. And I thought, okay. And it was just, I actually, when it was first suggested to me, I thought it was something that was impossible to do. And then I thought, well, most films feel impossible at the beginning, and then through collaboration, they suddenly shrink every day. They get smaller and smaller and more doable. And I thought I'd like my kids to go through that process of suddenly realizing that if you collaborate with people, creative people, things become possible.
And Sheridan Smith, she was filmed by her partner. Angela, as far as I can see from the pictures, you had to do it all yourself.
No, I had my very lovely husband, who is an actor and voiceover artist. He was here to help me, and I've got 2 children as well, so they also got an insight into it. We got my eldest.
But they're not in it, though. They'll want to be in it when they see Eddie's one.
Yeah, maybe they will. Yeah, maybe we'll just have to make 1 million more of these, and we can all have our kids in.
Well, we're going to get to that at the end with Jeff. And Gabby Chappie, you've been involved in many projects, including you're the co-writer of Misbehaviour, the Miss World film that's a rather wonderful film going out at the moment. But development hell, writers talk about notoriously. This is one of the shortest hells ever.
Yeah, and never known anything like it. I think I talked to Jeff, rang up just before the Easter weekend. I thought about it all Easter weekend, wrote something up, and then it was in the bag by the middle of the following week, really, before they started filming. So, yeah, absolutely shortest time ever, sorry.
And also, Gabby, you, in the one that you wrote, Mel, which went out last night with Sheridan Smith, it was quite specific demands on an actress. She wanted someone who could convincingly play a woman who's 8 months pregnant and also sing in tune Beautiful Dreamer at the end. But with the wonders of television, Jeff and Paul Whittington actually found you someone who could do both those things.
Yeah, it didn't quite work. I had the kind of the kernel of an idea, and Jeff said, I think that might work really well with someone who's pregnant. And I thought, oh God, yes, it would. And so he said, funnily enough, Sheridan Smith is, 8.5 months pregnant, and yeah, absolutely perfect. So that was really exciting, because I knew who I was writing for, which that doesn't happen that often unless it's something long running. And that was very exciting to think it was her, and I knew her work, and I knew she was very pregnant, and I knew she could sing. So it felt like the piece that was being written was very much in response to the performer as well as the world situation.
And if we bring in Tom Dunbar, the producer, and Jeff is the executive producer, but Tom, the tone of these, because we hardly ever see anyone now, we hardly ever talk to anyone, so it's quite a warm feeling and quite jokey in a way, but the situation overall obviously isn't. So the tone of these dramas, without giving too much away, they end quite hopefully, the dramas.
Yeah, I think they do. I think we didn't want to present across the board films that just left everyone depressed and miserable. In our experience of lockdown, some people, there are moments of levity, there are moments of humour that people are going through in these situations, and very much it was about trying to reflect that experience back to the people who are going to watch this show. We didn't want to just end on a downer on each of those stories, although obviously it's incredibly serious for a lot of people. But the vast majority of us are going through an experience that sometimes there are moments of humour involved.
And but Eddie and Tom, Jeff and Tom, Eddie said earlier that he wasn't sure this could actually be done. You must have thought that at various times, the two of you. First of all, who wants to go first? Tom.
I'll go first because I'll hand to Tom.
Yeah.
Because the very first germ of the idea, I actually thought what we'd be doing is asking acts like Eddie and Angela to shoot themselves on their own iPhones. I thought maybe that was the only way we could do it. And even then, to their credit, Kevin Ligo and Polly Hill at ITV said, we're in, because I think even if it looks rough, I think people will say, well done for having a go. But then the more Tom investigated and explored, and I'll hand over to you, Tom, the more within confines, the more sophisticated the setup became.
That's right. We were tipped off about some technology that had been used in live entertainment and in live and entertainment shows on ITV, where basically smartphones were delivered to Ant and Dec's house to do pieces to camera, and those smartphones were kind of top-end smartphones that had a piece of technology which allowed people to, much like the technology when your computer is taken over by somebody when they're doing your IT, it basically gets into the smartphone, and then thereby everybody else can see the picture that smartphone is broadcasting or is taking. So it allowed everyone on a Zoom call to share the screen of what was being shot by that smartphone. And that process opened up a whole world where we could bring in not just directors, but heads of department that we'd normally have on a film set to advise and kind of bring the whole process, kind of bring traditional drama and this new technology together and trying to find a way forward.
That's fascinating. So, Tom, the Ant and Dec, they had used this technology in lockdown, had they? Or for yeah.
Yeah, they had. They'd had just the day before lockdown, they'd had this technology delivered to their houses to film pieces to camera for something like Saturday Night Takeaway, and once we looked into it more and more, we realised that it gave us the opportunity, as I said, to kind of try and replicate the traditional drama process, but in a very different way.
And Jeff, and also Gabby, because there are more. What surprised me, because I thought before I saw them they'd be monologues, and indeed the other lockdown TV drama project at the moment is the BBC, as you know, are remaking Alan Bennett's Talking Heads. But what fascinated me about these is the extent to which they're not monologues. Even Mel with Sheridan Smith last night has many other people in it. There are vast numbers in several of them. That surprised me. Was that something you thought about early? Try to get away from the monologue.
I'll go. Yeah, for me, absolutely. I thought that if you're reflecting what's happening, then what's happening is we are all in our houses with our families, and that's it. We're not interacting. So we could stay true to what was going on out there. It would still look recognizable to everyone at home watching. It seems recognizable. So it wasn't a play. It's not, as you say, a monologue. The first thing I did was to speak to Gabby and the other two writers, William Ivory and Neil Mackay. And the reason why I think Gabby, well, she'll talk about this, but the reason why I think we were able to deliver the script so quickly was I was very consciously not too prescriptive. I said the only parameters were it should have a foot in reality, something that affects you or people you know, and that you should you should try and connect with you know, everything that's going on out there. So beyond that, I wanted I wanted them to be part of themselves. I mean, Neil Mackay's piece is about which is Eddie's story. Neil, it was inspired by Neil's attempts to stay in touch with his grandchildren, and I'll let Gabby take over. But she had a very interesting kernel of an idea, and I thought, I don't want to touch that. I want you to run with that.
But just for your answer, Gabby, I was interested that Jeff says about not setting too many restrictions. But the basic one, anyone who's ever seen a screenplay knows that it says interior or exterior, and you could forget about typing exterior in this because it is, by its nature, there's one exception in the Neil Mackay, which we'll talk about in a moment, but it had to be an interior piece, as it were.
Yeah, that actually, the thing that I found hard to shift in my own thinking is almost the rhythm of editing. So I kept thinking close up on Sheridan, and I just thinking, no, I can't punctuate like that because I don't know what they can do. And in fact, I think the interior wasn't so difficult, and the fact that people are inside on Zoom or similar a lot of the time. So the image of somebody with a screen in front of them with several faces, a la Celebrity Squares, feels very much of the moment. So that didn't feel like a constraint. It was more that I realised I'm so used to thinking of a camera being able to do all sorts of things, and I didn't know what would be possible. So it had to be made very simple in those terms and left to Paul.
Well, I was going to bring in Paul there because it's pretty well known that directors just ignore anything that writers put about close-ups or long shots or anything. So I don't know why you even bother. But so you, but again, this is all, and you're in your loft, I think, there, aren't you?
I am in my 11-year-old son's bedroom.
But amazingly, there, because that's where you directed the episode Mel from.
It is indeed, yeah. I've spent many hours in this little corner of the loft in the last couple of weeks, and yet actually felt incredibly connected to what we were doing. I've never felt less remote than directing remotely. It was an incredibly intimate, connected experience that we all had making the films, and that we were all on these screens in our little boxes. But it's exactly as Eddie touched on earlier on. It was as collaborative as it ever is on a film set. And we had our virtual set on our laptops, but as I say, it felt incredibly connected, very intimate. We had all the same kind of conversations on our virtual film set that we have on the real film set. And it was, and that was kind of the surprising thing in a way, was just how immediate and connected and intimate the whole experience felt. And that was certainly our experience. And anecdotally, what I hear from the other films is that all the other guys had a very, very similar experience.
Well, we'll bring in Eddie and Angela in whatever order, because you were in this curious position. We're all working from home, but you really were working from home. When I talked to Robert Glenister, he said that he didn't strictly even need to get out of bed because his character was in bed at home, so he could just stay there if he wanted to. Just talk us through that, because it is unusual to be working at home and to be recorded by your partner.
Yeah, I mean, I really liked it. I loved the challenge of it all, and it was quite nice that I didn't have to have the hour in the car in the morning and the 45-minute in the chair and the wait. It was just downstairs. The challenges are, though, the delivery men who like to ring the bell several times a day, the daughters who need the school homeschooling information, dogs barking, all that kind of thing. They were challenges, but yeah, I really grasped it. I loved doing it at home. I loved the challenge. I loved the technical challenge.
Eddie, go on.
Well, yeah. I think it took on the second day, towards the end of the second day, when everybody gets into the swing of it, and that's quite normal on a film set. The first day on any film set, we're all trying to work out how we've got to work together, and then we all suddenly collectively find a rhythm, and there's a great joy in that on a film set, and it was the same in the house. It was just another set of problems that you had to overcome, and you did.
Did you have to have demarcations though? Because otherwise you could have spent the entire 2 days working on it. So did you have moments where you said, stop, work is over?
The hardest thing we found was lunch, was the hardest thing, because we were filming in the kitchen and then they'd call lunch and all these, I've got 4 kids, 2 of them were in, and then the other ones who were doing schooling come upstairs or come downstairs from their bedroom. And they wanted me and my wife to prepare food for them. So we had to prepare food for a family of 6, then clean it all up and go back and fit the continuity back to the shot we just had. So me and my wife were frantically taking photographs of everything and then shoving food down their throats and chucking them out and going back to what we had.
Also, Eddie, I heard that the police took an interest in the filming at one point.
I don't know. There was a helicopter.
I was told a helicopter came low and wondered what was going on.
There was a helicopter, but I just think that was Paul Threlfall's agent just coming in for lunch.
So what do we think about that, Jeff and Tom? Because the rumour is the police saw David Threlfall dancing outside someone's house and they worried that the very strict rules were being broken.
I think it was might have been that, or it might have been he did look rather unsavoury. I think he was, I think looning around in Eddie's garden persistently, and they hovered for quite a while. But he did say something really interesting to me about that contact. He said that he and Eddie would chat with each other and talk, but obviously maintain a strict 2 meter. But he said gradually over the course of a few days, Janine would say, "You're getting too close," and then he'd move back. And he just, that natural thing, you gravitate towards other human beings. And even in this situation, he just found himself by remote control, by some force, gently pushing him near to the person he wanted to talk to. I agree with Paul, it was a really uplifting experience being a part of it. You know, with me, it was just having the privilege of watching, you know, like this screen we're looking at now, and just seeing everybody just working so hard to do their job. And then, you know, people like Janine and Celia and Jamie, Sheridan's partner, and Jason as well, Angela's husband. Just, you know, they're not cameramen, but the quality of the work was amazing.
No, well, I was going to say that because that's one thing the things that amazed me when I saw them, that I thought understandably, and we'd all have given you leeway on this, I thought they're going to be quite simply shot, and they're really not. There's considerable range of angles, close-ups, long shots. So, Paul, just talk us through that, because you directed the Mel with Sheridan Smith, and as Jeff says, with her partner Jamie, who is an entirely different profession, nothing to do with cameras. So let's start, because in the nicest possible way, directors like to be in control, sitting there in their chairs with their name on the back with the big megaphone and everything. And you had to give all that up and do it through another person. That must have been strange, was it?
Well, I think, again, like we were saying before, it was collaborative. I approached it in the same way, actually, that I would have done if we were shooting this film conventionally, in terms of what we were hoping to get out of it, shot-wise, in terms of coverage, in terms of how we wanted to visually tell the story. As you were saying earlier, you know, we took a decision not for this to simply play as a kind of selfie monologue. This needed to play on different levels and to kind of experience the story and the space with Sheridan's character. And so in terms of our ambition for telling that story visually, it wasn't so different really to how we try and approach it conventionally. Obviously there's challenges with that. There's the logistics and the technology, but I think if everybody is on board in the way that they were, and that includes Jamie Horn, Sheridan's fiance, who was kind of central to it. We included Jamie in all our discussions about how we wanted to shoot it. We sent him visual references, myself and the DOP, Ben Wheeler. So the kind of conversations that Ben and I would ordinarily have with a camera operator, we had those conversations with Jamie, and he engaged wholeheartedly with that and was as invested in it as the rest of us.
And if, again, talking through from the actor's angle, Eddie and Angela, so your partners who are filming, which is not what they normally do, I have this image of those in the days when there was air travel and there were movies about it. Those scenes where someone on the ground talks someone through, one of the passengers landing a 747, and they say there'll be this red dial on the left, and then there'll be a thing saying 38,000 feet, and I want you to watch it come down. And so it was like that, was it? They were in their ear, they were being told how to operate it all.
Yes, definitely in my case. I mean, I've got to say, there was never a point where I felt like we were left on our own. Paul Andrew Williams directed Mike and Michelle, and he was there. He was there constantly. It definitely felt like we weren't left on our own. He was telling us exactly what he wanted, exactly to the inch where he wanted the cameras to be. Ness, who was the DOP, exactly the same with the lights. Everyone was just doing their own job. Apart from my husband was kind of having to move things around because I couldn't move from the back. So it was exactly the same as every other set, just with a few less people within the room. But they were definitely in charge of their own departments, sound included.
And was it for Eddie and Angela, was it harder to concentrate on the acting side of it because the circumstances were so unusual?
I found myself just clicking into it. It's incredible. As soon as you say the word action, you're on set wherever you are, and we change things around a bit. You're in a slightly different clothes than what you would be. So I was definitely in character within a set. It was just the batteries. That was the biggest challenge was the batteries running out and having to think about the batteries because those phones were getting drained by the booms and this was getting drained by that, and you have to change your own batteries in the radio mic. So you were kind of acting away, but then every so often your mind would go to the technical side of, I need to change your batteries.
And Gabby, they don't like writers being around on set anyway, as we know. So they probably wouldn't have wanted you there. But you were able to watch on a laptop, were you?
Yeah, Paul was incredibly welcoming, and I dropped in every day and sat and watched on the Zoom call. It was amazing to see how what everybody's saying, that although it's being directed remotely, it felt incredibly connected. Everybody felt incredibly connected, and there was this conversation that was just always going round and round, people talking to each other. It was lovely. I felt a bit sad that I didn't have a part to play anymore. I was just a witness.
And Tom, I talked to the Glenisters about this for a newspaper piece I did, and I was fascinated by the set dressing, because they're using their own house, and Robert Glenister is playing a widower who's been a widower for some time. They had to go around the house and remove any trace of Celia, his wife, even though they were asking him to shoot the drama. And so I was just interested in that, but you had to work with the set they had.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say that there was a different producer on that short film, and he worked with them, and it was a matter of set dressing and props, gathering all the props. There's a scene in that where Tom opens up a cupboard downstairs to discover an apocalypse-style level of hoarding of toilet roll. So we had to get those props over to the house, get those in a cupboard, get soup in a cupboard, dress a small bedroom for Robert, and get all the right sort of things that were in the house. We delivered some choice pieces, but generally it was working with what was in the property, when they made the film. So yes, not only is it the people in the house, but not only doing costume, they were doing props, makeup, all the roles that you would expect on a film set. They were wearing many hats.
And people may have been surprised when Jeff referred to 3 writers and there are 4 dramas. That's because he's famously modest, and Jeff is one of the writers, and that's your one, the one we're talking about at the Glenisters. That's
right. That's tonight. Yeah, with the Glenisters, and that was inspired by my experience of my wife being very ill, and I spent about 2 or 3 nights just praying and counting her breaths, because the advice I got was number of breaths over 20 is dangerous, and it should be around about 14. So at the time, obviously, I was just trying to get her through it, and she recovered, thank goodness. but it did make me think that there perhaps is a big story which will make sense of what's been happening the last few months. But at the moment, it was a narrow view. We have a narrow view, and that's why it suggested the idea of short stories.
And in the situation we're in at the moment, as we know, until very recently, the only way to get tested for COVID-19 was if you were unfortunate enough to be taken to hospital. So there are people who think they've had it and haven't had it. All Jeff's family certainly had all the symptoms, but were never tested because luckily enough they didn't go to hospital. Anyone else, you can tell us if you want to, but has anybody else had direct experience of COVID, either themselves or their families?
We didn't think so, but my eldest son hasn't had a sense of smell for about 5 weeks, having come home from university a little bit off colour. And at the time, it had none of the hallmarks that we were being told were the symptoms of COVID. Now I'm not so sure. So,
yeah, I think that's very common. I think lots of people have things. We had sore throat and earache, and then we thought, well, that's not COVID-19, and then now they've just published that may be one of the symptoms. So you just don't know. You have no way of knowing.
And I was thinking about this for Jeff and Tom, that when, understandably, there have been lots of newspaper articles about all the virus movies, but, and this is what fascinated about isolation stories, it's always been seen as a disaster movie story, whereas you've done something, and it's because, you know, the whole isolation thing we're being asked to do is very unusual in the history of pandemics, but it's a totally different aspect of the virus story.
Yeah, it's, for me, it was, I think one of the interesting things in telling a story is that, so what we're reflecting is the impact of this pandemic, not the pandemic itself, not, you know, that like I say, I think that's another story another time. And it throws up a whole new set of rules, which, I mean, very obvious rules about not being able to go out, but other things, like in Eddie's story, there's a husband and wife, and the wife has left, and then music stops, and wherever the chairs are, that's where you sit. And it's being denied physical contact, even to have an argument in the case of Eddie's character and Leanne's character. The fact that they can't have that confrontation, they can't properly discuss things other than over the phone. That's what I think we've explored, is that we have to live, hopefully temporarily, life by a new set of rules.
But also, Tom, picking up on that, because it creates dramatic situations which are quite new. So we haven't talked as much about Neil Mackay's story, Karen, but in that you have the dramatic situation of, and people may often have wanted it with their relatives, in which it is against the law for a relative of yours to come into your house. And that's an incredibly novel, dramatic situation.
Absolutely. Well, you know, the classic ingredient of drama is conflict, and it's that wish to be close to your family, but not being able to, and represented by the glass in Eddie's kitchen that separates David from his grandchildren. But absolutely, it throws up so many different questions, and I think, as Jeff mentioned earlier, I think there are many different stories that could be explored through this, as we've all, you know, individually we've all experienced.
And Jeff, that's the most unusual of the four, in the sense that there is an exterior. It's filmed from inside, but there is a character outside who is David Threlfall. Both actor and character are under the age of 70, so it doesn't break any rules. But that, in that sense, it's the most unusual because it has that double perspective.
Yes, it was the most ambitious story, and lots of factors. You mentioned one, David being under 70. Also, David lives near Eddie, relatively near to Eddie, so we weren't requiring him to take public transport or put himself at risk in that way. And we also, the character, we reflected that we didn't want to encourage irresponsible behaviour. So it's clear that David's character passes by Eddie's character's house on the way to get groceries, which is something we're allowed to do, or exercise. And so we were very careful to A, not put anyone's health at risk, but B, not show something irresponsible as well.
And Eddie, you mentioned lunches in your house during filming. However nice it was, David Threlfall could not come into the house.
No, he couldn't. It was really felt sad actually to not invite him in for a cup of tea or something, you know. But he would sit in the garden at lunch, and you'd open the doors, and he would sit at the other end of the garden, and you still have good chats. The amazing thing is how people adapt to the situation we're in. We all adapt, and that's why it's probably really good to make these films about people coping with universal themes, but in this context, and also filming it within the restriction of this context, because it does kind of, I don't know, it adds to it. I think it's definitely added to it as an actor, me doing it, definitely.
And Gabby, as a writer, I mean, dialogue is what you do, but we have totally different kinds of dialogue in this. Neil Mackay has made the point about his drama that people now bellow quite intimate things across roads from opposite sides. You can't, you're not allowed to whisper. It's effectively been outlawed. And you have in your drama, Mel, which went out last night, the extent, and we're doing it now, that conversations with screens are what we have most of the time now.
Yeah, I think there's an aspect of disinhibition that comes with talking to a screen, and I do think that this comes into Mel, but touches on it, is people being in contact with people they haven't been in contact with for a while, people leaving messages for each other, people leaving little films for each other. I think that feels like part of the sort of new language that's developing around the lockdown, I guess, and that felt like something I wanted to use. And also my partner's working at home and seems to be permanently on Zoom, and the sound of the pandemic to me is somebody saying, Leslie, we've lost Leslie, where's Leslie? Because there's, you know, somebody's always dropping out bandwidth. And that was, I really noticed that, because I'm so used to being on my own. I spend my whole time on my own. So to me, my life had changed so little. I mean, as little as it's possible to change. I was still writing on my own all day, whereas everybody else that I could see seemed to be having this new way of living. And I was observing it.
But also, Gabby, which you also made use of in Mel, that unless your friends or the people you're calling have very unusual names, there is a risk of getting the wrong one on some of these technologies, which does happen in Mel.
Yes, there's a wrong number in Mel, because there's an imperfectly, somebody who, she looks up an old number, we don't see this, but she's looked up an old number in an old address book, and put it into her phone, and she is not phoning the person she thinks she's phoning a complete stranger, leaving a message for a stranger.
And Jeff, the only controversy there's really been about this is from members of the broadcasting unions who point out that just in the nature it had to be done, a lot of non-professional, non-union labour is being used. Now, as we've seen in this, the union labour was there and was advising. But that would be the obstacle to doing a lot of this, that you'd be taking work away from professionals.
Yeah, I think as long as there's no other way to achieve what we achieved than to use Janine Marsan and Celia DeWolf and Jamie. If there's no other way to achieve it, then morally, I don't think anyone will argue with that. As soon as we can, of course, we'll welcome back working with our colleagues. But I have to say, it was what was fantastic about this was when Tom and his team realised that we actually can bring in experts, directors of photography. Obviously, we were always going to work with directors, and so yeah, I don't have a moral problem. I don't think we've been unfair here, because there's no other way we could have done it.
No, and you've produced, these are extraordinary pieces of work, and I think people will think that, Jeff, when they see them. The biggest risk for you, I suspect, is that ITV will want more of them. So would you do them?
Well, I would if, but it would be only if we have to. You know, and I'm hoping, like everyone else, that things start to get eased next week. But who know? You know, if people enjoy them, and if we're still living under extraordinary conditions, we need a month. That's all we need. From now.
Okay. And Paul and Gabby, the project you've worked on, which recreate the past. I mean, Miss World for Gabby, and then the White House Farm Murders Paul recently worked on, was so dependent on history and trying to imagine what it was like. I mean, these are going to be amazing for future historians, aren't they? Because they exactly capture this moment of time. Gabby.
I hope so, because it's so specific, and things about it that I know people in the Second World War talked about the sound of the Second World War being glass swept up on the streets, and then you never hear it again. And I feel like the sound of birdsong is omnipresent and wonderful in amongst all the very terrible things that are happening. And there's so many things which feel it. Yes, they will never come again. I hope they don't. So yeah, and Sheridan Smith being exactly that pregnant was also part of that. This is a moment in time.
And Paul, just on that, because you know Jeff does it a lot as well, and you do with him, but the recreation of the past. To have something as immediate as this is, well, as we said, because of the time lag, it's unprecedented, really, in TV drama.
It is, of course, because normally when we're making factual drama, it's with the benefit of some kind of hindsight. It's looking back, and we're making this in the moment. And what we've made, you even talk about should we do more in the next couple of months, but these are absolutely representative of the last 6 or 8 weeks that we've all been living, and so there is an immediacy and hopefully a power to those that will resonate when we look back on them. It's difficult to say what kind of impact they have in a historical sense, because it's so immediate.
And I wanted to end on a warm note, because the dramas do. So with Eddie and Angela, it struck me, I've been watching, you probably have, there are various projects online of actors reading Shakespeare on Zoom or whatever. To me, as an observer, there's a kind of joy in those things, because you're people who were stopped from being able to practice your profession, and then suddenly you can again. So that must have been one of the excitements of this. Angela.
Yes, it absolutely was. I mean, it was a very kind of sad day when all the theatres and the cinemas closed down, and the realisation as slowly every set closed down as well. And you know, we got quite down in our households. It's like, how can we possibly sustain our industry? How can we go back? And so then to get a call saying we found a way was just magical. And I think creativity will always find a way. You know, it'll find some way of coming out, whether it be through doing sonnets on Twitter or the isolation stories. But yeah, I was really, really, really chuffed to be asked to do this, and it certainly helped my state of mind in these extraordinary circumstances.
And finally, Eddie, I suppose the only risk for you is that your family now want to get involved in the business.
Well, my wife was a very successful makeup artist when I met her. So we've always been in the business. They've always come to visit me, especially in America. They've spent lots of time on film sets with me. And their godparents and people that come around on the kitchen table are crew or actors and things. One of the pleasures of doing this is that the technology kind of enabled us to step up to the challenge. And I think the technology, what I always want to encourage anybody who wants to get into this industry, especially young actors, especially from young actors from backgrounds where it's much harder to get into the industry, you know, either through ethnicity or through class or whatever, is think of yourself as a filmmaker. Don't just think of yourself as an actor. Look at someone like Riz Ahmed, for instance. And this shows that if you can make films overcoming these obstacles, then those people can overcome those obstacles. And the technology made me realize, wow, this is amazing. All you need is a young kid on a council estate with this kind of technology, and he can make a great film. And that's brilliant. That's amazing.
ITV's Isolation Stories continues tonight at 9 o'clock. 2 more dramas Wednesday and Thursday at 9, and then at 11 o'clock on Thursday, there's